Hey, what's good, folks? I'm Lil Guillotine, and you're watching The Chopping Block.
Your teen and your neck meets beautifully.
The Chopping Block.
First of all, I'd like to apologize to my subscribers for not putting out much content over the last 6 weeks. I've been fully engulfed in the movement and all of the things that have come up in response to it. I'm in Free the 350 Bail Fund here in Madison, Wisconsin, which has been getting a lot of attention for our abolitionist politics and our role for the fight against the racist incarceration system. We've been extremely grateful for all of the donations that have been coming in, and it's enabled us to be able to bail out many black people here in the Dane County Jail and fight towards black liberation and free black people from the racist incarceration system that plays such a pivotal role in upholding the racist status quo of the white supremacist patriarchal capitalist system, right? We still have a long way to go to freeing all the black people who are in the jail only because they can't afford bail, which is a form of modern day slavery. I'll drop some donation links in the description below. Feel free to donate what you can or share it around if you can. Really interesting thing has happened with the bail fund. On this last Monday, the sheriff of Dane County, Sheriff David Mahoney, released basically a hit piece, a press release with our name on it, trying to claim that we are doing bad work because we bailed out 3 black people who were accused of violent crimes. And he even went so far as to say that they were responsible for committing those crimes, even though they haven't been given their due process yet. So we find it ironic that the sheriff is putting attention on the bail fund for freeing people who are allegedly violent whenever his own sheriff deputies and the Madison Police Department continues to brutalize people, and police departments across the country continue to kill black people and other people without any sort of criticisms coming from the sheriff, right? There's also been a lot of workplace organizing going on that I've been involved with in the Industrial Workers of the World, and in addition to that, doing a lot of organizing for the protests and the uprising here in Madison, Wisconsin, in response to the brutal murder of George Floyd, and against racist police violence, and to defund the police and to abolish police. I've been very proud to be able to be a part of that organizing. But the consequences, of course, are that I have not been able to dedicate as much time as usual to making YouTube content, but that's something I'm looking to get back into. I just reached over 1,000 subscribers, so I'll be able to monetize my videos now. That'll be a really big boon for enabling me to continue to make great content and have analysis around news and politics and current affairs, to be able to uplift the movement and help it out and bring people towards that good kind of analysis that critiques the patriarchal white supremacist capitalist system that's at the center of all the oppression and the racism that the current movement is fighting against. So I wanted to make this video today and try to explain what I know about grand juries. So recently we learned that there has been 2 people here in Madison that have been subpoenaed by the grand jury, and that's a big deal. And I wanted to break it down for you what a grand jury is, why they're used by the state and the government to try to destroy social movements that are successful in gaining social change in society, and why it's so important for the community to support those people who are resisting grand jury inquiries. So 2 days ago, 2 people in Madison got subpoenaed by the grand jury, and they were only given 2 days before they had to appear before the grand jury. There's an organization called Freedom Fighters Legal Support that ended up providing these people with pro bono legal representation, and with the help of this very skilled legal support that already has experience representing clients in grand juries, they were able to decide that they're going to resist the grand jury and not give testimony to it. And that's a very important development, and I'll break it down why. There's federal grand juries and there's state grand juries too. And what a grand jury is, it's a jury that's selected, in this case by U.S. attorneys, in order to decide whether they're going to indict someone or not. Grand jury proceedings are secretive. They do not make public who they've subpoenaed or what the subpoena was about until after the indictment is made. And the reason they do that is twofold. From its inception, the idea was that it protects the privacy of the people who are possibly going to get indicted. But in reality, and currently contemporarily, it's kept secret because it sows unrest and paranoia amongst communities, and especially activist communities, whenever there's movements going on that the federal government in this case wants to repress and fight back against. So the grand jury is selected by a federal U.S. attorney. There are no judges that are present, and there are some rights that you have normally in other kinds of trials and things where judges are present that you do not have during a grand jury. So for instance, if you refuse to testify to a grand jury, the grand jury can put you in jail for the entire time that the grand jury is convening. And in this case, that would be 18 months, and they can also extend it by 6 months. And so you can be jailed in federal prison for up to 2 years for refusing to testify in front of a grand jury whenever you're subpoenaed, right? And so that's a very coercive power that the grand jury has to force people to talk when they don't want to. Basically supersedes their Fifth Amendment constitutional rights to remain silent out of fear of incriminating themselves. Another special power that grand juries have that your regular juries and judges do not have is that they are able to subpoena as witnesses people who are up to 3 times removed from the event or the person that they're seeking an indictment against. And so that means if they're trying to indict someone, they can also subpoena to testify in front of the grand jury someone who heard something about whatever it is they're trying to indict that person against. So somebody who heard about the crime that so-and-so allegedly did, they can subpoena them, and they have to come and testify in front of a grand jury, or also face, up to 2 years prison time for refusing to testify. In addition to that, they can subpoena somebody who heard from somebody else who heard that somebody committed a crime, which basically casts this extremely broad net over who can be subpoenaed by the grand jury, which can be extremely paranoia invoking for movements. Because if you think about it, if there's a protest where there's like 1,000 people there, everyone who's there might have either witnessed some alleged crime that happened that the grand jury is seeking an indictment against, or even broader, folks who heard that something happened could possibly be subject to a subpoena by the grand jury and have to testify in front of it, or risk going to prison for 2 years if they don't. And then somebody who heard from those people also could be possibly subpoenaed by the grand jury. And so this ends up being like tens of thousands of people who are connected loosely or tightly to a movement or to a protest. And so what it does is it strikes fear in like everybody who was involved peripherally or directly in any kind of movement and protest, and especially uprisings, right? And so if somebody is subpoenaed by the grand jury and they end up testifying, because of the secretive nature of it, nobody in the movement is going to know what that person told the grand jury. And if that person told the grand jury about another witness or named somebody else from the movement, nobody would know, because of the closed nature of the information that they talk about, and because of these broad subpoenaing powers that the grand jury has, and because of the fact that not testifying could land you in jail for up to 2 years. It ends up making everybody who's involved in the movement very scared, paranoid. Nobody knows what's being said. Nobody knows who's been subpoenaed to testify in front of the grand jury, because all of that stuff is secret. And so that brings up an important point about why it's so important for folks in movements to resist the grand jury and to not testify, to not say anything. Because first of all, whenever you start talking to the grand jury, you very well may implicate other people who the grand jury can then also subpoena, and then cause this sort of ripple effect across the movement where people are being subpoenaed by the grand jury and risking up to 2 years in federal prison if they don't testify. And in turn, they might implicate more people, making the entire movement risk, or at least fear risking, time in federal prison, up to 2 years, which is an extremely long time to be in a prison or a jail, and has life-changing detrimental consequences for everybody, right? Nobody wants to be in jail, let alone for 2 years. So that brings me to the second reason why it's important that you resist the grand jury. It's also important that you go public if you get subpoenaed. Let the community know that you've been subpoenaed, and that way nobody has to guess, and they can come out and support you in your resistance to the grand jury. You don't want to face it alone, and in the case of here in Madison, there's an organization who I'll drop in the description below that can help folks with pro bono legal services to resist the grand jury. So if you get subpoenaed by a grand jury, there's multiple reasons why you should tell the community that you've gotten subpoenaed, because that way people are aware of what the state and the federal government is trying to do and its retaliation against the movement. And also folks can provide you with legal support that you would not necessarily had access to if you didn't announce to the community that you're being subpoenaed. And also the community can come out and support you in your resistance to the grand jury. Another reason why coming out and telling the activist community that you've been subpoenaed by the grand jury is so important is something called a Grumbles Motion, right? So previously I mentioned that you can be in jail for up to 24 months if you refuse to testify to a grand jury. There's also a workaround that a lot of lawyers will try to access to make sure that you don't spend that much time in jail, and that's called a Grumbles Motion. Basically, it means that if the lawyer can prove that the person who's been subpoenaed by the grand jury is steadfast in their conviction to never testify, then they can argue that placing you in federal prison is a punitive punishment because you're never going to talk no matter what. And whenever the community shows up and does protests and banner drops and actions to support the person who's been subpoenaed by the grand jury in their resistance to the grand jury, that actually can become legal evidence to support and uplift the Grumbles Motion that the lawyer can legally submit in their argument that the person subpoenaed will never talk. So those are the reasons why it's very important for folks to come out to the community whenever they've been subpoenaed by the grand jury. So as you can see, because of the effect that these grand juries can have, the state often will use these grand juries to subpoena people and to seek indictments on folks involved in movements in order to try to scare the movement out of doing anything anymore at all. It's important that we, in this time of this massive uprising and this huge movement that's been largely successful at winning many gains, like here in Madison, they've successfully gotten the police out of the high schools and also have won an oversight committee over the police, although it remains to be seen how effective that is because many of those are very impotent, if you will, and have no power. I personally don't have a lot of faith in that oversight committee to make any change, but it might, we shall see. Whenever these gains are being won by social movements, the state will engage in counterinsurgency measures, one of which is the grand jury indictments. Others have to do with arresting prominent protest leaders, which we've seen many times here in Madison, and charging them with trumped up charges that land them in prison for many, many years, even though they've done barely anything. And so I'd also like to stress at this point that anonymity is very important. A lot of these folks are getting in legal trouble because they were able to be identified on security footage and other people's live feeds. That's another thing. Live feeds are a no-no. I know it's like very tempting to chase clout and have that live feed up. You get thousands of views at a protest, but it's a lot better if you would just record the video and then go back and edit out all the faces and then post it. You can still get clout on social media with your protest footage, but just don't go live. Never do it unless you're filming the cops, right? And their retaliation, then it's a good idea. But even then, you want to make sure you're not filming anything that can be incriminating to anyone. And folks should be wearing masks, right? There's no reason why we shouldn't wear masks nowadays with the coronavirus. Here in Dane County, there's a mandate. Everybody who's outside has to wear a mask. So let's make sure we're wearing masks that cover up our identity. It's probably important that if we're going to be doing any sort of actions that are going to end up being incriminating, that were wearing anonymous clothes that is non-identifiable. We've seen at least a couple people here in Madison get arrested based on a type of shirt that they were wearing that the police were able to identify in security camera footage. Remember, these security cameras are fucking everywhere nowadays, so you cannot get away from it. So if you do end up engaging in some sort of activity that's incriminating for yourself, make sure you're anonymous, right? Don't wear clothes like this, for instance, white frames that are heavily identifiable. Tattoos can be covered up by armbands and things like that. So that's it. That's what I wanted to share with y'all about the grand juries. Don't be fooled by them. Together as a community, we can resist these things. We can come out on top, and we can continue to win positive social gains that have long and lasting effect and change society, despite the state's best counterinsurgency methods. So stay strong out there in the struggle, and I hope to see you in the streets. Peace out, y'all.